Welcome to Political Sandbox by Chamber, the place where politicians get to show us their ideas for improving the country. You can join this conversation on Twitter at Chamber Voice or online at chamberuk.com. So I'm Gillian Ashley. I'm the Chief Executive acting at the British Dyslexia Association. We have shared somewhat of a similar journey. I've had a career in teaching and I've spent most of my career supporting children and young people with dyslexia. And I'm also a parent of an adult who has dyslexia, and that's my daughter. Mm-hmm. So I've had that journey from teaching right through to parenting. I feel immensely privileged to be in the position that I'm in. I have a fantastic staff team and well supported by the trustees. And it's great that I can be here today to share with you your journey with dyslexia. If you want to also join in our media, we are at BDA Dyslexia. So Matt, could you tell us a little bit about your journey with dyslexia?
Well, it's great to be here and to be discussing this topic. For me, making sure we have more support for people who are dyslexic is incredibly important because helping people to succeed is at the heart of any good education. And you can only help people if you support them according to how their minds work.
Yeah.
And for me, I at school just thought I wasn't very good at languages and at English, and I concentrated almost entirely on maths-based subjects. And it was only when I got to university that I was diagnosed, and it was because a tutor said to me, you know, you can talk, but you can't write, and sent me off to be tested, and the test identified that I was dyslexic, and then I got a huge amount of support to essentially reconstruct how I read and how I write, and I got what I needed, and now I'm, you know, I've been in a career which is all about words and the use of words, and that's that I couldn't imagine doing that before I got that support, which all started with the diagnosis.
And that's actually the experience that quite a lot of people have. So we have had a lot of support in school for our children, but what we're finding is that diagnosis can sometimes be quite uneven. So we're finding that sometimes it's a little bit more of a postcode lottery.
Right.
What's your take on that?
Well, I think that there should be much more widespread recognition of dyslexia. Yeah. The debate has come on leaps and bounds over the last couple of decades. There's no doubt about that. But there are tools now widely available for screening for dyslexia. There's a clear need for teachers to have the training that's needed across the board, because every teacher is a teacher of dyslexic children.
Yep.
And there are very strong techniques for how you can teach children well according to how their minds work, but you need to know which of your pupils is dyslexic. The same is true of other neurodiversities too. Yep. But you know, I think I concentrate on dyslexia because I have that personal experience.
So when you were at university, was there anything in particular that supported you the most? So was it study skills access? Was it assistive technology? What did you find the most useful?
Well, the assisted technology I've used a lot since. It was after university that Microsoft invented the wiggly red line, which is incredibly helpful. But at university, once I was identified as dyslexic, the educationalists retaught me how to read and write. So for me, they taught me to see each word as a picture, and then by seeing each word as a picture, I can read much more fluently. That's worked for me, and it's worked very effectively. So I've been able to essentially, operate in a normal working environment with the benefit of spell check.
Yes, thank goodness for spell check. So why do you think then that we have this almost a mismatch between the support that children can access in schools and then the support that our young people access when they go into university? So In university they can access DSA, which is a fantastic resource. And through DSA, children and young people who are going on to university can have things like study skills, a laptop, assistive technology. But within our school system, we find that that's really based on the schools themselves having the finances and also the local authority. Why do you think we've got that mismatch there?
Well, I don't know, but I hope that we can crack that problem.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much more technology in schools now than there was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
It went in to support remote learning, but that technology now exists and can be used. There's technology available to help teachers, but ultimately, teachers need the support and training too. So I think there's a lot that needs still to be done, but I think we're in a much better place to be able to go and do that, because firstly, people recognise dyslexia as what it is, which is the mind working differently, rather than in the way that it had a stigma attached to it in the past. And secondly, because the technology is available, but you can't solve this without teachers, and the technology can get you so far and has great advantages, but ultimately we've got to make sure that teachers get the support they need to.
And one of our great frustrations at the British Dyslexia Association is that we feel that we're constantly fighting for that recognition that if teachers aren't skilled, if they're not trained with all of the insight that we know how to support learners with dyslexia, if our teachers haven't got that insight, how can they best support our children in schools? And this can be very frustrating for us at the BDA, but also for parents when they phone in for help. We're fighting quite hard to have that embedded in initial teacher training. Why do you think it hasn't been?
Well, I don't know. And what I do know is that there's always a competitive demand on teachers' time, whether that's in the classroom or in training. And of course, a lot of training happens in the classroom as well. So the combination of the two.
Yeah.
I think that it's something that we can and should make the argument for. Ultimately, the dyslexic mind brings many great advantages as well. The statistics show that around 1 in 10 people is dyslexic. That figure is much higher, around 40% for successful entrepreneurs, but it's also much higher for people who end up in prison. Yeah. And that shows that there's both great opportunity for getting this right, to support people who, whose minds may be more creative, more lateral thinking because of having a dyslexic brain. But at the same time, things can go wrong. And because there's also those barriers to being able to, barriers to literacy, essentially. So there's a big opportunity, and we need to make the argument for it.
Yes, we do. We do, definitely. Can I ask you then, when we think about adults, we now have a lot of children who were identified as dyslexic in the 90s. And we know now that they are out in the world, in the workforce. And you're right to highlight that they have so many strengths. How can we, do you think that we could persuade employers to invest in people with dyslexia and take that chance to employ them? Because you're right, they've got so many strengths to offer.
Well, I think the most important thing is, when it comes to employers, is the big argument that people who think differently can bring value and asset, because the best decisions are made when people who have all sorts of different ways of thinking come together. And that diversity is valuable, and whether that's diversity in the sense of different backgrounds, different genders, of course, yeah. In terms of neurodiversity, that helps as well. So there are some employers, famously, who go out of their way to identify and to hire dyslexics or people with other neurodiversities. GCHQ is one example,
yes. Yeah.
Who are really forward-thinking in this area.
Yeah.
But there's many others who could benefit from that opportunity, and I think we need to win the argument. We need to talk about it, and in particular talk about the positive benefits of the dyslexic brain.
And also not to be afraid of the challenges. because there are many strengths, but we know sometimes there can be barriers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that somebody with dyslexia isn't going to be fantastic in their job. Maybe it's about also recognising some of those barriers and being open to putting different things in place.
Well, I think you need the two, don't you?
You do,
You need the support because there are genuine and real barriers.
Yeah.
And also to recognise the opportunity and the upside.
Yeah.
That people who might come at a question from a completely different angle.
Yeah.
There's big benefits, and my view is that latter, the benefits are getting bigger and bigger in the modern workplace, and the barriers are getting easier and easier to overcome, largely because of the technology of how we work. I joked about spell check before, but the combination of spell check and autocorrect, I mean, it's a lifeline.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many great things that people can use as well, because there's voice to text, text to voice.
Yeah.
So if we're alleviating some of those literacy difficulties, there's some great pieces of software there, and often they can be free. And I think that's part of my frustration with schools as well. Not that I'm frustrated with the schools at all, because we know that in our schools the teachers are really working hard, but that there are tools out there that they could use for children with dyslexia. But there's a reluctance or a lack of technology that, almost seems to be a barrier. I wanted to ask you, we've always had a little bit of a debate as well, because of course dyslexia isn't recognised as a medical diagnosis. So it kind of falls between different departments at government level.
Yes.
And that makes it very difficult. So it also means that within our SEND code of practice, it's not so easy to insist that you could have a dyslexia assessment through the school. What do you think that would help in that situation? Where do you think the government is with that debate?
Well, whether or not dyslexia is regarded as a medical condition, we need to ensure that people get the identification so that they can then get the support.
Yeah.
And the route to doing that is second order. What matters is that you get better identification, better support, and assessment that works for people to bring out their properly to reflect their skills and capabilities.
Yeah.
And I think that whether it's in education or whether it's in the criminal justice system when things go wrong, or whether it's in business, in all three areas there's improvements that can and should be made.
Do you think that we should be looking at screening children and young people at different transition phases?
Yes, I do. I do, and I think that some people say, well, screening on its own can't solve this problem. Of course not.
Yeah.
But knowing, having an indication of who is likely to be dyslexic, which is what screening gives you, not a categorical diagnosis in the medical sense or identification, but an indication, is incredibly helpful. And then, of course, there are formal tests that can give that formal assessment. But screening, just to have an overall view, can only help. And that screening is increasingly available online. It's easy. It's pretty cheap, and in many cases can be done essentially for free. I think it's important not to muddle those things up and not to say that is the solution. But but let's get started.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, screeners don't diagnose, you're right to point that out, but they do give us an indication of the different strengths and weaknesses that somebody has. And I think that is crucial when we're thinking about anybody as an individual at whichever stage in their life they are. If we want the best out of people, we have to know where are their strengths so that we can help them to play to their strengths. I just want to sort of go back a little bit in our conversation because I was fascinated by your explanation of how you had that help with reading and that it was through pictures. And it is really interesting. I mean, I can't actually remember how I was taught to read. It seems such a long time ago. And I'm not dyslexic myself, so in that respect, I didn't actually have a difficulty in learning to read. But we're fighting at the moment for a wider approach to teaching of reading. Reading is a really complex thing, as we know. And there was a psychologist in the 60s, Goodman, who said reading is a psycholinguistic guessing game, and we all know that sometimes that can be the case. What do you think about the reading framework, saying that at the moment it's got in it that systematic synthetic phonics is the only way that they're recommending of teaching reading? What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's incredibly important to be evidence-driven. My reading of the evidence is that synthetic phonics is the most effective tool both for the dyslexic and non-dyslexic brain. But you also need each individual teacher to have an understanding of each individual child and to be able to support them to learn to read in a way that works for their brain. So I think that there's a path through. There's been a debate for over a decade on the importance of phonics, and there's no doubt that it is not only hugely valuable, but also that of any particular tool, it appears to be the one that is most effective based on the evidence. But so I think this is it's an and rather than an or, because you also need to be able to respond to how each individual pupil's mind works. That itself needs the screening and the assessment that we were talking about. So I think that there's a way forward.
If they've been, and you're right. So synthetic phonics has been the means of teaching reading for a decade, and there was that debate: should it be synthetic phonics versus analytical phonics, which is what we previously used. So if synthetic phonics has been the means of teaching reading for the last 10 years, how do teachers know what else to do? Because that's all they've been equipped with.
I see. Well, there's that gets right into the meat of teacher training, and making sure that the underpinnings are strong is important. If you can then add on top of that techniques that work for an individual child, then there's clearly value to that as well. So there's a debate to be had in this space. There always is going to be, but I find it unhelpful when it's framed as synthetic phonics versus the rest. I think it's better when it's a synthesis, because we do know that synthetic phonics works on average best, and it's a classic challenge of public policy between what works best on average overall versus how do you then support those for whom individually that might not be best, and making sure you're working, you've got the correct assessment of who that might be.
Yes, I don't disagree with you at all. I think my frustration is when I go into schools, quite often teachers say to me, what can we do next?
Right.
And I think that is, and I don't necessarily think you've got the answer, but I think the what next is a big question, because when children fail to learn to read through synthetic phonics, there seems to be a gap in that knowledge for our teachers of what is the next thing. So in a way, I'm completely agreeing with you. We have to widen the skill set of our teachers and equip them with that knowledge of what is the next thing that they can do when synthetic phonics fails.
Well, this is clearly something that there needs to be more work on, and making sure that it's founded on the evidence and then based on the needs of each individual child.
Yes, absolutely. So can you just, to finish off, can you just, give us a little bit more insight of how dyslexia what it has meant for you as somebody with dyslexia? Yeah.
Well, throughout my career, after being identified at university and working out getting the support then, and working out what I needed to do, I then went into a career in which the use of language is absolutely central, and honestly I made some big mistakes early on based on language and my and getting words muddled up, and I've increasingly learned how to deal with that. Actually, in government, I had the enormous privilege of having a private office who could write short notes on top of very complicated briefs, and then I either could choose to put the time into reading brief in full in detail, or meeting the team who'd put it together in order to have the conversation, which obviously I found much easier. And so I made it work for me in government. And talking to other people who are dyslexic, who've been in government, like Michael Heseltine, one of the things he said to me was actually he thinks it helped him concentrate on the big picture, because you need to delegate the detailed work, and you need to concentrate on the big picture, because that is the job of a minister in government. Actually, there's a funny story about that, because when I first came out as a dyslexic, I got a text from a number I didn't recognise, and it was from Michael Heseltine saying, bravo for talking about it in public, because I hadn't spoken about my dyslexia for 20 years since university. And I tried to save his mobile number in my phone, but I couldn't spell his surname. So my dyslexia was right there, up front and central, as I was responding to probably the most famous dyslexic in government.
So have you got him as Mike H in your phone?
Well, that would be my dad, so that doesn't work either.
No. I think that I'm really pleased that you've shared that, because I think you've hit on something which I know for a lot of people can be quite difficult. So actually being brave enough to say, I am dyslexic, is quite a big thing.
Yeah.
And often people don't want to declare that they're dyslexic or disclose that to their work, because they might fear that they could lose their job, that they would be penalised in some sort of way.
That's exactly what I worried about. I worried, for 20 years I didn't talk about being dyslexic.
Yeah.
And it was because I was worried that it would hold me back.
Yeah.
And then when I got into the cabinet, I had a new private secretary, and I said, one of the things you need to know is that you have to write these short cover notes so that I can assess which of the various papers in my red box I needed to go into in depth, and which ones I needed to have a meeting on instead to make whatever decision was necessary. And he said, well, I'm dyslexic too, and you should talk about it, because you should show for people who are younger, who are dyslexic, that talking about it is okay, and that you can make it to the cabinet even if you're dyslexic. And so I did, and the response I got was overwhelmingly positive. I mean, absolutely fantastic. And in fact, a fellow cabinet minister himself came out as dyslexic shortly afterwards. I mean, we're like London buses. You wait all this time to get a dyslexic in cabinet, and then two come along at once. And and it was a very rewarding experience, actually, talking about it, and especially the response I got from young people saying thank you for talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think young people are much more open to saying, this is who I am.
Yes.
This is how I identify. So, take me as I am or leave me. That's fine then. But I find that we've still got a number of our older people, if you like, so 30s and above, that maybe aren't even diagnosed, that are wondering, am I dyslexic or am I not?
Yes.
And they're in their jobs and often facing some big difficulties. So it's really great, actually, that you're encouraging people to either find out that they're dyslexic or to come out and say, yes, I'm dyslexic.
Yeah, or one then the other.
Yeah, basically. And I mean, the great thing about it is that, they are protected under the Equality Act. So that's the really good thing about the Equality Act. There is that protection for people with dyslexia and other special educational needs.
Yes, and reasonable adjustments can be made, and they're increasingly easy to make. Yeah. So we need to reassure people that it's okay if your mind works differently, and in fact there's upsides too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
For your time. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed hearing about your journey and your thoughts on where we're heading with dyslexia. I've just got one last thing to ask you, a surprise sliding question. What do you think is going to happen with the SEND review? We're all waiting with bated breath on when it's coming out. Where do you think dyslexia might feature in the SEND review?
Well, I don't know. I've been talking to the minister responsible, and I hope that it will be ambitious and far-reaching. And I haven't got the details.
No.
So let's see. It's an important project to work on.
So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I've really enjoyed it. Chamber is the community voice. You can join this conversation in Twitter at Chamber Voice, on Instagram at Chamber UK. You can also visit the website at www.chamberuk.com or email info@chamberuk.com. Thank you, Matt. Really great to meet you.
Thanks for having me on.